Yeah, I'm Dave Oxford with Veterans for Peace, and we couldn't be doing this without the wonderful help of the Women Against Military Madness and the cooperation of people like Craig Palmer, who hates getting recognition, but he did get that. They'll kill me for that, but I got you a cheeseburger, so you'll be okay. So yeah, and actually throughout history in the United States and all around the world, the peace movements have been led by women, and rightly so. And usually the men will jump in and grab the mic and pretend like they did everything, but I'll defer that honor and give it to the Women Against Military Madness. Our guest speaker tonight is, for many of you, needs hardly any introduction, but it's somebody I was saying last night is that we lost Polly Mann. How many people knew who Polly Mann was? Right, a 103-year-old who was an activist, and one of her favorite books was Speaking Truth to Power, and that takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of guts, and no one that I know speaks more truth to powerful places, because her headquarters is in D.C. She lives in D.C. and she goes into the halls of Congress and the Senate office buildings and speaks the truth to the powerful people, and then they haul her ass out of there. I mean, she's had a first name basis with a lot of security people, I think, in D.C. But it takes a lot of courage to do that, and she does it not just yelling epithets. She's actually saying, she goes and gives speeches to them before as she's being hauled out. She's giving the speech as she's being hauled out. So, anyway, I've been privileged to consider her a friend, and we've been on a different thing. We closed a bar in Madison. Remember that piano bar? And so I've been really blessed to be having that. And for me to say the word blessed is unusual, but I'll say it here because I feel like I'm blessed to have that friendship with Medea, and she's a hell of a dancer. She can almost keep up with me, but not quite. Anyway, without further embarrassing details, our guest speaker, Medea Benjamin.
Well, Dave might be known as somebody who speaks truth, except the last thing you said is not true. So, in terms of this issue of speaking truth to the powerful, I was just thinking in the last 2.5 weeks, I have had interactions 3 times with the Secretary of State, Blinken. Good. So the first one was at a hearing about 2 weeks ago. That was a hearing called U.S. Diplomacy for 2023. Well, I think with a title like that, there'd be a little talk about diplomacy, right? No, you're wrong. So I felt compelled, to get up and talk diplomacy. And that at that point, it was right after the U.S. had said that this idea of China being able to mediate peace in Ukraine was absolutely ridiculous. So I got up and I said, the American people don't want to keep funding an endless, unwinnable war. We want negotiations. And if you don't like the Chinese peace proposal, where is your peace proposal? I thought that was a legitimate question, right? Obviously, that did not resonate too well. So yes, I got hauled out and arrested on that one. And then it was, just last week, it was World Press Freedom Day. Yes, Press Freedom Day. And none other than Anthony Blinken was going to be at the Washington Post talking about press freedom. And, they started out, and I listened for a while, I try to hear something good. And they were talking about the lack of press freedom in Iran, the lack of press freedom in Russia, the lack of press freedom in all these countries that the U.S. doesn't like. And indeed, there is a lack of press freedom in just about all of those countries. But, I couldn't just let it go by without saying something about Julian Assange. Right. So, got up on the stage with a banner that said, Free Julian Assange, and said, we can't let this day go by without calling for the release of Julian Assange. And I started then on my whole spiel. Well, the Washington Post, beacon of free speech, turned off the mic, turned off all the sound, and then immediately these security guards start, running up, and almost unconsciously, kind of unconsciously, I wrap my foot around the chair of Anthony Blinken. And there he is, like sliding back while they are pulling me off. And he turns around and sees these three big bulky guys, and these, were his security detail. And he turned around, and to his credit, he said, "Be gentle with her." I thought that was kind of nice. So I got hauled out of there, and my partner, who also got up with me, he started speaking out for Shireen Abu Akleh from the U.S. journalist, U.S. Palestinian citizen, who to this day, in fact, it was just a year since she was murdered by the Israelis, and there has been no accountability, no justice for her. So we thought those were two important things to bring up on a day that is commemorating and calling for press freedom around the world. But it's interesting how, the U.S. always picks and chooses who they want to call freedom for, who they want to say is a democracy, who is not a democracy, who has human rights, who doesn't have human rights, all that kind of stuff. And then there was the final one last week, a couple of days ago. Anthony Blinken must think I'm stalking him, which is kind of true. But the last one was a hearing that they had on U.S. relations with China. And again, you'd think that, maybe the Pentagon, you'd have the hawks there, and they're talking about how we have to build up to confront China. And then you'd have the diplomats in the State Department who would be saying the other side of things about saying how we really have to, talk nice and we have to have good relations. It's kind of the other way around. The ones in the Pentagon are the ones saying, maybe we should be a little careful about this. Maybe a war with China would not be the greatest thing. And you have the, quote, diplomat out there saying, we got to get China. So there was once again, no talk about diplomacy. And a couple of us had shirts on that said, China is not our enemy. And one of the CodePink women had a sign that said, money for the poor, not for war. And as soon as she got up with her sign, that was like, oh, you don't say that at a hearing. Nothing about money for the poor, not for war. That is very anti-American. So she got hauled out and arrested for that. And I just give those examples of saying, speaking truth to power is, I don't know when it's ever been more important than it is now. With the war in Ukraine raging, with the potential for another insanity of a military confrontation with China, and with all the restrictions we have on our civil liberties here at home, and the fact that this Pentagon budget never goes down, and these Republicans are talking about we have to stop the increase in the debt, you'd think they'd be saying, that means we have to have a major, significant, real cut in the Pentagon budget, you would think, right? Not these people. Exactly, Todd. It goes up, and it goes up always more than what the president gives them. Because he suggests the budget, and then they say, not really enough. There's nothing in here for my district. We better up it so we have more money for this and this and this. And, the cycle just goes on and on and on. And the level of corruption is just insane. So we have now just a small handful of Republicans who are considered extreme right-wing Republicans, who are the ones that have the sane position when it comes to things like the Pentagon budget and things like war. How topsy-turvy is everything right now? When you have, in the case of Ukraine, these Democrats who are so timid, and they put out 30 of them signed this letter in October of last year to Biden, not saying, let's stop giving all these weapons, let's stop fueling this war. It said, thank you for all the wonderful things you are doing for Ukraine. Thank you for all the weapons we are sending. Thank you for all the economic aid that we are sending, all the humanitarian aid we are sending. And couldn't we please maybe perhaps start thinking about negotiations? And I remember reading that letter and I said, oh God, no way can we support that letter. And Veterans for Peace looked at that letter and said, oh God, no way can we support that letter. But anyway, given what Congress is like these days, people said to us, well, it's the best you're going to get. So you might as well try to help get Congress people to sign on to that. So that letter came out maybe in the summer of last year. And it was supposed to be, these letters are supposed to come out and have 1 or 2 weeks that they're open and then be closed and then be sent. Well, 2 weeks went by, they had 2 people who signed the letter. And so they said, well, we better keep it open. And they kept it open, and they were trying and trying. And I remember how naive I was, thinking, why would any Democrat not sign that letter? That is such a mild letter. And I thought, at least, certainly, every Democrat in the Progressive Caucus, and it's the largest caucus in Congress. It has almost 100 members in the House. And so I thought, well, easy. Every member of that is going to sign. And I remember a couple of months, they were still trying to get. And I was on Democracy Now! And with Amy Goodman, and Amy said something, well, I hear there's this letter that Democrats are calling for, and that it has 12 members already signed up, and isn't that great? And I said, no, that's pathetic. And when I hung up, boy, did I get calls from some of our friendly groups saying, how could you say that's pathetic? We are working so hard to get the Democrats to sign on to that. You have to be supportive of this. So they kept it open, and groups kept pressuring. And I'm sure you all pressured here, right? No? You didn't? Because you didn't think the letter was any good?
Right.
Oh, yeah, the ultras. The ultra radicals said, oh, we're not going to support that letter. Well, others who were more willing to accept the reality of the Congress today were pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, it was October. And they said, well, we better get this letter out because it's getting close to elections. And so they put the letter out, and at that point, it had 30 members of Congress that signed it. Still pathetic, I would say. Yeah. And they put it out, and there was a great piece in the Washington Post about it, and I thought, oh, well, this is going well. And oh boy, within 24 hours, there was such a backlash, you wouldn't believe it. And the backlash was coming not from the White House, because people in the know, and that's not me, they said the White House didn't care. They thought that it would be nice to see some pressure coming from the left. It was people in the party like Nancy Pelosi who didn't want to show any division within the party with elections coming up, and was saying, how dare you not follow the White House on this critical issue of national security. And then there were people who had signed the letter. You know Jamie Raskin? Mm-hmm. You might remember Jamie Raskin from the January 6th hearings, and he's so brilliant. He's a constitutional lawyer. He's a really, really brilliant guy. He had signed the letter because his constituency was really putting pressure on him to sign. When the letter came out, he wrote this scathing letter saying, take my name off of that. I signed that when it looked like Ukraine was going to lose, but now it looks like Ukraine is going to win. And yes, of course, there are negotiations, but we will have negotiations after victory. That's what he said. And that's what many of the others, they started pulling their names off, and then the pressure from those who didn't sign made them withdraw that letter in 24 hours. I've never seen that in my entire life of working in Congress. A letter that was signed, sealed, and delivered was then rescinded. And so you see how since then, the Democrats and these progressive Democrats, I mean, you've got Ilhan Omar here. You would think that Ilhan Omar would be saying, of course we need peace talks. They have been so silent on this issue. In fact, there is one person who signed the letter. Have you heard of Ro Khanna from California? Some of you have. So he's he's a very, very sharp guy. He is going to become senator. I say he's going to run for president one day. He knows how to work the system. He knows how to say the right things. And he had signed that letter. And he went on CNN after that and he said, of course we should have negotiations. We shouldn't stop sending the weapons. We should keep sending the weapons. But of course we should have negotiations. And we thought, all right, at least there's a little sanity in that. And we went to talk to him and his chief of staff to say, did you get any backlash? He said, on the contrary. We got calls in from all over the country saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. We got people now saying, Ro Khanna for president. So all he got was a good response. You would think, wouldn't you, that other than Democrats would see that and say, oh, I want to be out front on this issue. But no, not even Barbara Lee, the sole person in all of Congress that did the right thing to vote against war after 9/11. We have put so much pressure on her. And she says, no. And Nancy Pelosi, I saw her the other day at an event and went up to her and said, nicely, Nancy, please, really, the Republicans are starting to come around on this and understand that the American public actually wants to see this war ended. This is not going to be good for you in the elections. This is not going to be good for Biden. We need peace talks. She wags her finger at me and she says, we do not need peace talks. We need victory. That's what she says. This is what we are up against. And so I say there's a small group of Republicans who have come out and said that we should stop the blank check, that we should have an audit of where all this money is going to. Does that sound logical to you? Yeah. But these are like Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is Lauren Boebert. This is Matt Gaetz. That guy, Qsar, you heard of him, the guy from Arizona, totally wacky guy, who did a video of him killing AOC, a cartoon video, and they were censored and he had to leave his positions on committees because of that. This guy wrote a letter to Putin and to Zelensky saying, come to my district in Arizona, let's open up the peace talks, I will help mediate. Insanity that is happening. And then, it is true that public opinion is changing. Despite the incredible propaganda of the media, despite this narrative that is out there that Ukraine is winning, Ukraine is going to win, they're going to get back every inch of territory, all we have to do is throw in more weapons. And still, the American public, over time, you see the same polls being asked of them, and it's changing rapidly. And the last poll that was done by AP asking if we should send more weapons to Ukraine, only 48% of the American public wanted more weapons sent to Ukraine. I find that quite astounding. So there was, we can talk about, if you heard about this controversial peace gathering that happened February 19th in Washington, when it was libertarians and Movement for a People Party that organized it, and a lot of groups on the left were like, we can't go there, we can't associate with them and all of that. But there was a guy there with a sign that I loved, and it said something like, you lied to us in, and then the list, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, why should we believe you now? I think that's a generalized opinion among a lot of people in this country, which is a real skepticism, a real sense of mistrust about our government. And that's why you see the polls changing, despite the fact that the vast majority of people in Congress keep voting for more weapons to Ukraine, despite the fact that the White House doesn't lift a finger, doesn't do anything for peace talks. It's the contrary. They blow up peace talks. They want to make sure that peace talks don't succeed. And when people say to us, those of us who want to really find an end to the war, you don't care about the Ukrainian people. I said, the ones who don't care about the Ukrainian people are the people in power in this government who want to see this war going on and on and on. Who was it that said, keep this war going to the last Ukrainian? There's, that isn't this a cheap way for us to weaken Russia without losing any U.S. troops? So we know for a fact that a month after the war began, when there were really intense talks mediated by Turkey, and they were coming up with a solution, who came in? The UK and the US, who said, forget it, don't talk, don't make compromises, we will support you to victory. And there is a lot of proof now that that actually happened, because people who oppose our viewpoint saying, no, that didn't really happen. Well, now we have interviews done by people who were in on the talks, including the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, which is quite funny that Israel wants to mediate a conflict. Stay home and do that. And that was Naftali Bennett, who said in an interview that they were very close to reaching an agreement on a ceasefire, that both sides wanted to see a ceasefire happen, and that the West blocked it. And then let's go up to date to what's happening in the Chinese proposal. So today we have the G7 meeting in Japan. Zelensky flies over. He is being greeted as the hero, and countries are falling over themselves now about how many more weapons they're going to give, how much more money they're going to give, who supports the Ukrainian people more than the other one. They're hauling in people like Modi from India to say, hey, you haven't condemned Russia. What the heck is wrong with you? You're buying oil from Russia. You got to get on the right side on this one. And there they are, committing more of our tax dollars to this war. And in the meantime, there's not a word that I have seen in the press. I read the articles and I Google and I search in there for the word diplomacy. Nothing. Search for the word peace talks. Nothing. Search for the word ceasefire. Nothing. There they are. Wouldn't it be a beautiful moment for these countries that come together, and they're the ones that are really funding the war, to come together with Zelensky and say, how are we going to find a negotiated solution to this war? Nothing about that. And meanwhile, it's then up to other countries around the world to try to play peacemaker. And luckily, there are many of them right now. So there is the Pope, who talked about the mission that he has, and he has sent a number of high-level people in the Catholic Church over to both Russia and Ukraine to have peace talks. And we are trying with the group Fellowship of Reconciliation to go back to the large number of faith-based leaders in this country who came out before the holidays to say it was time for a truce, to now come out and say we support the Pope's efforts. So there's the Pope. There is the Chinese proposal, and the Chinese are actually taking this very seriously. And at one of these hearings that I talked to you about, they had two people talking about Russia, and they asked them, well, what do you think of the Chinese proposal? You know, the senators were asking. And both of them said, absolutely ridiculous. This is a vanity proposal from the Chinese. They just want to gain some points internationally by looking like they care about peace. They don't care about peace. In the meantime, the Chinese are taking it very seriously. They have high-level envoys who are in Ukraine now. They have high-level envoys that are in Russia. And it's quite ironic because one of the ways that the White House said phooey to you on the Chinese proposal is they said, the Chinese are too close to the Russians. How could they ever mediate? And you think, well, isn't it good that the Chinese have all this leverage on Russia that they can push Putin to the negotiating table? And we need that. And so you have the Chinese playing a very serious role. And in fact, a friend of mine and I went to, on behalf of CodePink, went to the Chinese embassy last week to have a meeting with them and thank them for their efforts at peace. And we thought, well, you know, it's a formality, it's a symbolic thing. They took it really seriously. And in fact, they called back yesterday and said, we want to have you on a global webinar we're doing from China. We think it's an important thing to have the voice of American people who want to see an end to this war. Yeah. And, you know, we're really delighted. And we are setting up a meeting with the Vatican representatives in Washington. And another important now and brand new initiative is coming from the African countries, spearheaded by South Africa, that has had a long-standing good relationship with Russia. And do you know why? Anybody know why?
They fought apartheid.
They opposed apartheid. Mm-hmm. You know, it gives me chills just to think about, you know, what our government did to prop up apartheid and how they were getting help from Russia, from the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And of course, that stays with people. That's a long-standing alliance. And then, yes, there is the BRICS, which is the economic alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So the U.S. is very upset at South Africa for not joining in sending weapons to Ukraine. But the South Africans have now called on 5 other nations. They have 6 countries that are getting involved and will soon be sending emissaries to the region to push for negotiations. And one of the other people who has been quite fantastic, I would say, you know, absolutely wonderful on this, has been the president of Brazil, who is known by the name of Lula. Mm-hmm. And he has said that he wants to create a peace club of nations around the world. And let's face it, this is a conflict that is not just affecting Ukraine, not just affecting Russia, not just affecting Europe, where it really is, the sanctions are really having a blowback effect, but it's affecting the entire world because of the increased prices of energy, the increased prices of grain. And so naturally then, these African countries are coming forward and saying, hey, wait a minute, you all, this is hurting our people. Let's find a solution to it. And what I loved was what Lula said after he had a meeting with Biden in the White House. And he said, I mean, we know that Biden was pushing Brazil, like they've been pushing other countries, and Blinken, who really should go work for the Pentagon instead of working for the State Department, because he has been going around the world not doing anything about peace, not talking even to his counterpart Lavrov. He had one meeting with Lavrov. It was on the side of a international conference on the sidelines. Does anybody know how long that lasted? Less than 10 minutes. Less than 10 minutes. I mean, that's just making a joke of the idea of negotiations. And instead, he's been going around the world telling countries, you've got to stand with the Ukraine, you've got to send your old weapons to Ukraine. And so Lula said, you know, we're getting pressure to send weapons to Ukraine. He said, we don't want to send weapons to Ukraine. He said, that's not what Ukraine needs right now. It's got so many weapons from all over the world. What Ukraine needs is interlocutors who will talk to the Russians and tell them what a horrific mistake they made by invading Ukraine. What Ukraine needs is interlocutors who will go to the Ukrainians, talk to Zelensky, and say how important it is to make concessions and to have peace talks. And he said, we don't want to join this war, we want to end this war. So I want to end on that note because I think it's important for us to understand when we have this topsy-turvy, crazy thing going on in our own Congress and in our own White House, and when the Western world is obsessed with continuing this war without even knowing what victory means, and perhaps taking us into a nuclear war. It is important to understand that there are people all over the world who do want to end this war, who do want to support Ukrainian sovereignty, but who are starting to see this more and more as a proxy war between the US and Russia. And they say, in that sense, we don't want to take sides. So we have to be this voice. And I am very excited that there's a conference coming up in Vienna on June 10th. And Vienna, Austria is one of the few neutral countries left in Europe. And it's an international peace in Ukraine conference. It's very exciting because there are our counterparts all over Europe who have been doing a fantastic job, much better than we in the United States, getting people out on the streets. Because they have people in the religious communities who will not just sign a letter, but will actually mobilize and get people out in the streets, who will actually use their pulpit during their sermons to talk about this issue. And they also have something that we don't have, which is they have a trade union movement that has been for decades with them in calling for peace. And the trade union movement not only funds a lot of the peace movements in Europe, but it gets their members out into the streets. So they get 10,000, 20,000 people out, where we're lucky if we overcount, like the left loves to do, we can say we got 1,000 people out, but it's not nearly 1,000. So it's very exciting that in Vienna, we're going to be able to come together and learn from them and come out with a global call from the grassroots, because there will be people there from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. It will be very exciting to come out with this global call. Then we're going to take that to the capital, to Moscow, take it to Kyiv. Oh, and there are many people coming from Ukraine and Russia to this meeting as well. And then we will go to the capitals of all of the countries that are involved in this war. So it is exciting to think that there is more movement going on at the grass tops from these leaders as well as the grassroots. And our job is to really build that groundswell of support from the grassroots that'll force some sanity into the heads and the positions of the people who run this country. Thank you.
A lot of people, we have a lot of questions here. And Lucia, did you want to make an announcement?
I just want to remind people that Craig has Medea's book that you could purchase. And for me to read the book, I think I understood Medea's position, but there's a whole lot of history about Ukraine and about Russia and the relationship that, you know, I'm an American, so I don't need to know about other people's, other countries' histories, right, or languages. But it was very helpful to me to read all that.
$10 suggested donation.
Oh no, I think it's like 15 something.
This is we're in a real bookstore now.
We're selling Craig's book.
It's about 15.
Yeah, and if you don't have 15,
It's a deal.
If you don't have 15, you can negotiate with Craig. Trust me, he's easy. And I want to have a quick shout out before we get to, I know you have a lot of questions here. John LaForge is here, and John is back from being in prison in Germany for doing the dastardly deed of trespassing on a nuclear armament site and getting arrested there. And we're glad to have you back, John.
Thank you.
Yay! Heroic work.
Shout out, I would point out that it was such an easy joint that I got to leave on weekends. And one weekend we took the train to Berlin, 35,000 people marching against the war in Berlin.
Wow.
Anyway, so we will entertain questions, right?
Yeah, and I want to add to that there are two, because we're a women's group here, there are two women in Germany, I'm sure you know, that put forward a petition to call for an end to the war. It was a petition that was very critical of Russia, of the rapes, of the war crimes that are being committed. But it said, what we're saying here is that the only way to stop this is to end the war. And they got over 800,000 signatures on that. And it was because of them that on the first anniversary of the war, on February 24th, they called people to come out. And that's one of the reasons, that's when you're talking about, one of the reasons that so many people came out. So yeah, very exciting. And I do want to say thank you, Lucia, for mentioning the book, because I didn't give my normal talk here. I didn't talk anything about the background, the context for this war, any of those issues. So if anybody wants to talk of those, we certainly can. But the book really goes into that in detail, but I hope in a very readable way. People tell me they can get through it in like 2 readings.
Yeah.
So we really tried to make it more of a primer, but very important information. And I also feel it's important for people to get a copy to give to somebody else who they have had an argument with. Not necessarily the person who threw some punches yesterday. But anyway, so.
And if you have questions, please just make it very concise. If you get up with like 5 pages of text, I want you to sit back down, because I would rather have a short statement about something you want to add to the discussion, and then a question, much more, because there are people here who can speak for about a half an hour on the subject of Ukraine. We don't want that right now, but I address your stuff to Medea. We're going to start with this young lady over here.
Okay, my question is very short. So the money that the U.S. is sending, do we know what budget is that coming from our defense budget?
Very good question. It is not coming from the defense budget. It is coming from the sky. It is coming from the trees. It is coming manna from heaven. It is being printed. It's not part of the budget.
That's what I was afraid of.
Yeah, and it's a really important question to say, because so far it's $114 billion.
So we don't actually know where that's coming from? Is that?
Adds to the debt.
Yeah.
Absolutely adds to the debt, and it is when they hide it in other. The first one, the big one of $40 billion, wasn't hidden. It was on its own to be voted on. Not one Democrat voted against it. There were 57 members of the Republican House who voted against it, and 11 members of the Senate who voted against it. And now they're saying the money's going to run out by the summer, and they're going to need to have more money. And we met with the office of Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, because who else are you going to go to? And he said, we're going to be opposed to it, and we've got to find others who are opposed to it. And one thing that people are starting to look at is to say we're opposed to any more money for Ukraine if it does not include a serious policy for negotiating an end to this war.
But they haven't had to say where it's from, like what budget they're.
It's from your pocket. It's from you. It is from you.
It's
and
from Eisenhower's famous quote.
military-industrial complex.
It's
yes.
stolen from the mouths of children, from the people that need homes, from people that need education.
Absolutely, then that's a beautiful way to put it, because it really is, and it's so disgusting right now when they're talking about cutting all of the little safety net that we have, that there's always money for war.
I think this gentleman here in the red shirt.
He's had his hand up for a while.
Did you have your hand?
I've had it up a couple of times. The question is, I signed a petition for supporting CodePink and getting money to publish an ad in the busiest paper you can do with him, whether it's Washington Post or New York Times. But and then I got an email from somebody that some other group just did that. So is there a strong push to try to raise money and try to get advertising in these big?
Yeah, I mean, it's very sad that we have to pay for the truth to be in papers, but the ad that was that just came out is the one in the New York Times, and Colleen Rowley, who is a signatory of that ad, has copies of it here, and it's a fantastic ad.
Yes, well written.
It really goes into why this happened, and it goes into, it's got a subheading that you could barely believe to see in the New York Times. What is it calling the one that says, like, what if the shoe were on the foot?
Yeah. It's got a reverse of the U.S. if the U.S. was surrounded. This probably cost around $150,000 for that quick moment. And I'm just going to quick add. We want to multiply this ad that appeared quickly in the New York Times and the one, I've got copies of both of them, that CodePink is going to do next week. It's going to appear in the Hill. And so here's the plan, CodePink's plan. And what you're saying is we need to do something here in Minnesota. We have our 10 elected people that are doing nothing, okay? So why don't we form little groups?
Veterans for Pink?
Form little groups. We don't even have to reinvent the wheel. All of the history, everything is in this small print. And take these to all of our congresspersons and to our 2 senators who will refuse right now to sign anything and whatever. So we need to organize this and take little groups. It doesn't even have to be more than a couple people. We already have Bill taking the one to Rochester. So we have, and I'm taking the one to Angie Craig down in the South. We already have like maybe 3 or 4. But we need people up north, so if you know people up north to the 2, Duluth and whatever. Anyway, come see me afterwards. I have all the copies of those ads.
Wonderful, and thank you, Colleen, for signing both of those ads. And where is that sign-up sheet that was going around? Does anybody have it? Is there anybody who didn't have a chance to sign it? Because we want to be able to tell you what happened with this ad that you asked about, a very important question, and we want to be able to do follow-up with you. So yeah, we're very excited. We in DC are organizing on the 24th, which is Thursday. That's the day the ad's going to come out in the Hill. While people are doing it in their districts, delivering it, we are going to be in the Capitol taking it door to door to the different members of Congress.
Grassroots organizing. Now it's your turn.
Thanks. My name's Dan. I'm in the DSA, and I'm kind of nervous asking this question. I have a feeling I know where it's going, but anyway.
Go for it, Dan.
You mentioned Ilhan.
Yeah.
I'm curious where the rest of the squad stands on these things. I mean, obviously from the vote, if they didn't vote against it, we know that. But I'm just curious if where the rest of them are, if you've reached out to them, how they're responding to this stuff.
Yeah, it's really sad to see them cowed on this issue. Because, you know, now they're sticking up and going up and say, we're going to go up against Biden if he gives in on the debt, on cutting some of these key programs. And yet, they have not come out for peace talks. And we put pressure on them, we talk to them, we talk to their staff. They say, yes, we'll do something. Yes, we'll put out a statement. You know, we say, even put out a tweet. You know, anything that says, yeah, we need peace talks. It seems like the easiest thing. And they say yes, and then they don't do it. So I think one of the things is that there is a very organized Ukrainian American community in different parts of this country. They're in Washington all the time. When I talked to Pramila Jayapal, the head of the Progressive Caucus, she said to me, they are out organizing you 10 to 1. And so they know they put, a congressperson puts out anything, they're going to get the blowback immediately. And so it just means, you know, that we have to be there. When some of these Republicans voted against the $40 billion, they said they were hearing from their base. So, you know, they're not hearing from us enough. And there have been people who have interrupted town hall meetings of Ilhan Omar, of AOC, and said, you know, what are you doing on Ukraine? And the Congress people didn't respond by saying, yeah, you're right. On the contrary, they responded in a very negative way. So we still have to work with them. You probably know Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. He's from Madison. He was the co-chair of Progressive Caucus, a very, very lovely guy. I talked to him, and he is one of the ones who signed the letter and took his name off. And he said, the problem was really not what the letter said. The problem was the timing. It was coming out right before the elections. And of course, then we said, well, great, then put it out again. You know, and yet it doesn't happen. Foreign policy is very hard for people, progressive Democrats, to take a position on that's different from the mainstream of the party, because it doesn't win them very much at all. What it does is make them a magnet for the other side. So we have to do more.
Yeah, I would
Okay, I'm gonna go with Charlie. You got it first.
I just wanted to ask, what did you feel about the expansion of NATO recently? And like how that affects the war in the Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, the expansion of NATO is horrible. The NATO existence is horrible. None of this would happen if we didn't have NATO. But, you know, we have NATO, and it has expanded, unfortunately, despite all of the calls and the, from 1991 on to say, don't expand, don't expand. And that now we have Finland joining, probably Sweden joining soon as the Turks give in on that one. And it just makes the situation more dangerous. I mean, with Finland joining, there's a huge now new border territory right on Russia. And, you know, it's a big win for the Finnish military-industrial complex. And they have a large weapons industry there that have been lobbying for this. Just like the Swedes have, the good old Swedes You know, if any of us really looked up to the Swedes as a great example of social democracy, the Swedes have a big weapons industry, and that weapons industry is lobbying to join NATO as well. So it's very dangerous.
And I think we have this gentleman back here in the blue shirt.
Yeah, my son is like pushing my arm.
Yeah,
Zelensky recently spoke at the Arab Summit, and he asked for like support from Arab and Muslim countries. I'm curious what your thoughts on that and what that really means. The other piece is, I'm curious if you know what is going on in the Ukrainian public, seeing that the United States has influence, China is getting in, several countries are getting in. Is there
Getting in where?
getting into interfering into the conflict in Ukraine? Is there a sense that people are seeing the United States using Ukraine as a proxy? What is the public opinion about what's going on?
Let me take that first and then go back to the Arab League issue. So public opinion is very hard to tell during a war because people are afraid to say what they feel. And you might have heard of the Quincy Institute, which is an institution. I go back? That's good, yeah. The Quincy Institute, which is an interesting think tank in Washington, D.C. that came together to bring left and right together in a non-interventionist position. And one of the key people in the Quincy Institute, Anatol Levin, just came back from Ukraine. And he said, we've created a Frankenstein because there is so much censorship in the press right now. And Zelensky, who used to be saying that a victory in Ukraine would be going back to where things were a year ago, is now saying it's going back to 2014, which includes Crimea. And that if people oppose that, question that, say, wait a minute, maybe going for Crimea is not a good idea, they are in trouble in Ukraine. That's considered treasonous now. And so imagine what the polls, you can't trust what the polls, opinion polls say. Not the Polish people, but the opinion polls. And I think though what the opinion polls that do come out say that a majority of people in Ukraine are very much in favor of this war and very much want to see the war carried out to victory. There are other groups of Ukrainians and people that we work with that are conscientious objectors, that are working with and there's a big movement now of people who don't want to join the military and are either in hiding because men of military age in Ukraine have to join the military, they're not allowed to leave. So there is certainly an underground movement of people who don't want to fight, who don't want to be part of this war, but it seems that they are the minority. What I've seen in the opinion polls, though, is very interesting because it seems like in the areas that are experiencing the most fighting, there's the most openness to negotiations versus the western part of the country where there isn't the fighting going on, and they are the ones saying, fight until victory. And then in terms of the issue of the visit of Zelensky to Arab countries, the Saudis have been in great disfavor with Biden because Biden went and said, come on, loosen up some more oil so that the prices go down, and they said, screw you. The effort...
Which is historical, but it's really unique to hear Saudi Arabia saying no
to something that the U.S. has asked them for. And so the meeting that Zelensky had with a number of Arab countries to try to get them to be more overtly against Russia, I don't think is going to have much of an effect, because whether it's Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or Qatar or these other Arab countries, they don't want to get in the middle of this. China has so much influence in the world right now. China is just a huge economic power, and many countries, including India, don't want to have to make those kinds of choices. So they might say, thank you for coming, nice to see you, good you're here, blah, blah, blah. But in terms of actually coming out and sending weapons to Ukraine, I don't think they're going to do it.
Now, did you, I think you talked about the Arab League?
That's what we were just talking about.
I think we're going to go Mike Madden and then Bill. and then you, and then Big Joe, and then you.
Hi, Medea. Thanks again for crashing the Ignatius Blinken party on World Press Freedom Day. That was fantastic. Given the 2014 occurrences in Ukraine that you cover in your book, the coup and the subsequent attack by the unelected interim government on the breakaway provinces, should those breakaway provinces and Crimea have a voice at any peace negotiating table that is separate from Kyiv? Because I don't think that Kyiv can represent them anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, when there's talk about respecting Ukrainian sovereignty, you have to respect the sovereignty of the people in the Donbass. You have to respect the sovereignty of people in Crimea. And there were votes taken in Crimea before Putin was in power, back when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, and there was a referendum held in Crimea that had 94% of the people saying they did not want to be part of Ukraine. So yes, their interests have to be taken into account when you talk about the Ukrainian people, when you talk about sovereignty, when you talk about giving people a voice in what their, how their territories, their countries should be run.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're gonna go to Bill, and then we're gonna go to Kristen. Sorry, okay, then we'll go to Bill, then Joe, and then to Todd.
Yeah, Medea, you brought up that we are sending $114 billion to Ukraine. Did I hear right that Seymour Hersh is saying that Zelensky maybe and his cronies and officials may be skimming money off of that?
Well, how could you think that? You sound like a Putin apologist. Come on, you know, all this money that's pouring in there and people at the top are not skimming it off? I don't think so. You know, they just say it's like Iraq and Afghanistan. That the money doesn't get accounted for. It's like the Pentagon never being able to pass an audit.
Yeah.
You know, there's just so much money floating around.
So you did hear that from Seymour Hersh?
I did hear that from Seymour Hersh, and I also saw Transparency International, which is a pretty conservative organization, continues to say that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. Dave.
Yeah, we're gonna go, you
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
say it. Come on.
So I really want you to get this book because she breaks it up pretty good, and also there's an amazing skill to take such a complicated thing and then break it down into steps and explain a point of view you might not have heard. So I love that you've done this. I love that you've learned how to get that information out here. So this is a paragraph I want to read to you. Quote, "This war in Ukraine is the most intense information war humanity has ever seen. There are so many lies flying about that it's totally impossible to perceive the truth," said end quote, said Ambassador Chaz Freeman, a retired senior U.S. diplomat. What do we say to this guy? No, you're wrong. We independently, we've got bookstores, we've got Women Against Military Madness. I want every one of you, before you leave, to take the Women Against Military Madness newsletter. Hold it up there, Dave.
Right over here.
And we put that out every 2 months. I printed an extra 50 yesterday, so we'd have them here for you to take home. You can find the truth. You will find the truth if you seek the truth. And I don't want to sound like a religious leader. I want to say that with people like Medea in places like this bookstore and Vets for Peace and all the groups here that are representative who are trying to get word out. We are here, we're doing the work, spread it around, talk to your friends, talk to your enemies, get the word out, and we will get it out there. And thank you all for being here. I'm really impressed that so many people turned out today. So thank you.
Amen, sister.
Amen. Hallelujah.
So we're gonna go to Joe, and then Todd, and then, what's that, Gil, you're gonna go after,
I was just commenting on the book.
That it's halfway through and he bought it yesterday.
It's an easy read, and it's a good read.
Okay, good, thank you. Hey, Joe.
But you know, why would any Russian government ever sign any treaty with the West ever? Given the history and the circumstances that we are in right now, under what circumstance would they ever even want to sign any kind of treaty or ceasefire or anything with the West? That's my problem in my head. What are we gonna offer those folks to say, okay, we should reach some kind of an agreement here? I don't see it.
Depending on what source of information you are using, you'll have a different opinion on what is actually happening in Ukraine. U.S. press says Ukraine is actually having the upper hand right now, and the counteroffensive is coming soon and is going to be successful. And others saying, not just the Russians, but there are writers in the U.S. saying that Russia is winning this war. I don't think either of them is true. I think there is a stalemate, and that the counteroffensive might be successful in getting back some territory, but that it's not going to be on the way to a complete victory. And in the meantime, you have to feel that Russians are starting to get tired of this war too. Originally it wasn't even a war, it was a special military operation. Now it's over a year. A lot of Russians being killed. And we know historically how the mothers of soldiers have created movements to end wars. And the mothers of soldiers in Ukraine are starting to do that now. And there are underground movements. There are millions of people who are getting their news from sources other than the government. And so yes, well, if you look at opinion polls in Russia, they'll show people the majority behind this war. I think there's more and more people who are starting to question this. There's also the issue of the sanctions. While it's quite remarkable how well the Russian economy has held up with these sanctions, it's starting to hurt. And at G7, they're coming up with more sanctions now, and these sanctions are starting to affect major industries like the automobile industry, like other manufacturing industries, and it's starting to affect people's lives. I have a lot of friends that I'm in contact with in Russia, and they say they're feeling it, and people are not happy. So there is pressure from inside Russia. There's pressure from Russia's friends, like China. There is pressure from the global community. They're not just putting pressure on Zelensky, they're putting pressure on Russia as well. So I think you have to see it in that context. Things are not going well for Russia in this war. They haven't even been able to take back Bakhmut after months and months of fighting, and it's basically an absolutely destroyed city. So I think there are a number of different pressures. So that's the reason why they would do it. Who would help to guarantee that whatever was signed would actually mean something? I think there you have the possibility of China doing that, the possibility of other countries that would step forward to do that. That's what we'll see at the negotiating table when it gets there.
And Todd Pierce.
So not so much a question, but you mentioned Chaz Freeman. Let me say,
you can stand up. I mean, we can't probably hear you.
so you mentioned Chaz Freeman. I've known Chaz Freeman now for 15 years or so, and you're absolutely right. WHAM has so much good information, except it doesn't get out very much, and it's as good as it can get for what's available. But the fact is, Chaz Freeman is absolutely right. There's a massive, and the term now being used, and I know about this. I can legitimately call myself an expert on cognitive warfare, psychological operations, because that's what the Army trained me in. So the point is, there's a massive cognitive warfare campaign going on to create the perception management that the Pentagon and all these people, CIA wants. So it's really being skeptical. So I just want to add, like I say, I'm one of the signers on this thing. I just talked to KFAI in hopefully will be on the program soon. But I bring a little different angle. Mine is an angle seeing things from within the military, being a Guantanamo defense attorney and whatnot. So I'm quite critical, probably more critical than anybody here of the U.S. military and CIA. So only throwing that out, that would love to talk more beyond KFAI, or if you would want to listen to KFAI, I hope you will when I'm on there. And one final thing, I'm also with a group, Massachusetts Peace Group, that's going to be sponsoring Jeffrey Sachs in June on a program. And if anybody's interested, I can get more information to WHAM to disseminate in VFP.
Very good, Todd. Thank you.
So let's give Todd a round of applause for signing that and all the other work that you did. And you referred to this June 10th thing. It's actually the same day as we're having that Vienna conference, is the conference in Washington commemorating 60 years of JFK's speech about peace that he gave at American University, which many people think was the beginning of the end for him in coming up against the military-industrial complex. And Jeffrey Sachs, unfortunately, is going to be doing it by remote, but there will be other people like Bobby Kennedy will be there, Dennis Kucinich will be there, and we're trying to get a bunch of interesting diversity of political positions, but people all coming to say that this is an anniversary that must be remembered if we're going to confront what we're dealing with today.
And very good. And by the way, Don is going to broadcast this on KFAI next week?
No, a week from Thursday.
A week from this Thursday. So if you have people that you want to say, hey, you should listen to what this woman has to say, I tell them that you can tune in 90.3 KFAI, and so yeah, that's good. And Don, of course, has done this yeoman work with the peace community. He's a real gift. As we all know, NPR all the way up to the CNN, there's not a lot of our voices being heard in this, and you have to speak very loudly. And Medea does a good job at that. And also on a week from tomorrow, the Veterans for Peace Hour will be on, and we'll have our special Memorial Day hour on KFAI at 90.3. And KFAI is a wonderful gift to the community because you're not going to hear this stuff on the NPR.
Yeah.
So I run it. Don? Oh, Greg, well, actually, I got Greg first.
Don's
first. They're all pointing at each other.
You know, call me, it seems that.
Call you what?
Late for dinner.
You know, the people who attacked you last night, they said you're calling on saying the U.S. is anti-imperialist, whereas in reality, they got some convoluted thing about you're in favor of Russian imperialism. And so they're consider themselves anarchists, but in which a lot of Trotskyists would say the same thing. And but the point, I think, we should be trying to analyze the big picture of what the U.S. is doing, because otherwise people are not going to understand why this war really got going, what the long-range alternatives are, because it's just going to, I mean, they have some really big ideas, like controlling the world, the unipolar idea of what the U.S. should do.
Absolutely, and the U.S. was able to do that after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and totally misused its power in so many ways over these decades to create enemies around the world, and not only attacking countries like militarily going into them, but so misusing its economic power with this stick of sanctions that is now coming back to bite the U.S. And so you have an empire that wants to recover its ability to control the world, and you have a world that's moving in a very different direction. And so you have the economic entity like the BRICS that now controls more economic output of the globe than the G7 does. And you have regional groupings coming together like Latin America. You have the organization called CELAC, which they are trying to use to strengthen and replace the Organization of American States, which has been controlled by the US and used by the US to try to bludgeon any country in Latin America or the Caribbean that dares to leave the US sphere. And what is most interesting right now is the effort by large, powerful countries to get off the dollar, to de-dollarize. And that is something that is being sped up amazingly by this war in Ukraine, because the sanctions on Russia are coming back to bite countries all over the world, the sanctions on China, the sanctions on Iran, and so there are powerful countries now. It's not just small countries that are being brutalized like Cuba from the sanctions, it's big countries. And they are starting to do trade outside the dollar. They're starting to have very strong regional organizations, and they're starting to create a multipolar world. And the fact that the US isn't able to tell its allies in Latin America, tell Brazil, hey, you're going to join us. The fact that they're not able to tell our, quote, friends in the Arab world, dictatorships in the Arab world, that, hey, you're going to join us. The fact that these African countries have now much more trade with China than they have with the United States. This is a multipolar world, and the people in power in this country have not yet gotten used to that.
Yeah, very good. And speaking of Cuba, Greg, you have
it seems to me that the United States and Western Europe and Canada are white countries. The rest of the world are people of color. It seems to me this is very racist, white supremacist ideology that's taken over this country. My question is, do you think the young people of color today and the populations of color in this country see the United States international foreign policy as a racist policy? And are they joining the peace movement, the justice and peace movement that opposing U.S. foreign policy?
Well, let's break that down a little bit. Let's remember that there is a terrible educational system in this country, and that people of color tend to bear the brunt of the worst schools in this country that don't teach foreign policy. There was this saying by Mark Twain that war is the way that Americans learn geography. Most Americans, and particularly young people now, they tend not to focus on foreign policy issues, tend not to know a lot about the world. Most Americans don't have passports. Majority of Americans have not traveled outside the United States. Majority of Americans don't speak more than one language. On the other hand, as I was saying before, there are more and more people skeptical of the U.S. narrative in many ways, and certainly young people of color tend to be ones that are extremely skeptical. And it's the black community in this country that has been the most anti-war throughout its history, understanding whether it was Vietnam and what Martin Luther King said about that war, or whether it's polls that break down by ethnicity. The most anti-war constituency in this country is the black community. Now you asked, are they getting involved? They have other issues that are so much more pressing.
Mm-hmm.
They have so many issues that just hit them in the face every time they wake up in the morning and go out their door. Whether it's police violence, whether it's poverty in their community. I mean, so many issues to deal with. And then young people are looking at the future of this planet and saying, is there going to be a future with the climate crisis that we're facing? And many young people of color who are activists are also involved in climate justice kinds of issues. So, you know, there are very, very important issues that young people of color are involved in, especially those who are activists. I would say that they are with us in terms of their position. Black Lives Matter has always put out good positions on foreign policy issues. When we talked about faith-based leaders, you know, the first ones we turned to were Jesse Jackson and Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, and you know, they signed on and tried to get their colleagues and other churches to sign on. So I would say they believe the same things that we believe in, but they don't have the time to put into it that some of us do.
That's good. And I think we're our questions are done. Do you have an announcements?
I would just say to everyone that Mike has been out there picking up litter, and last night some people found some pages or notes stuck on their windshield, and so you might today also to tell you that Medea Benjamin is just plain wrong or lying. So it's not true. But don't just crumble it up and throw it on the ground. Put it in a proper waste receptacle.
All right. Very good.
Thanks,
Medea, will you sign books?
Yes, I will. Maybe you could buy them back there, and I'll bring them up here.
Yeah, bring the books up here. I think would be a good idea. Yeah, and tomorrow at Beckenwood, if you know somebody that, God, I got my niece is graduating or something and couldn't make it today. At Beckenwood at 9:30 or 10?
10:30.
10:30 in the morning.
Come for some muffins and coffee and tea, and then at 11 the presentation will start. Beckenwood is on the West River Parkway, on the Minneapolis side, and you need to sign in at the front entrance, and you can sign in as my guest in unit 251.
Is that north or south of Lake Street?
It's south of Lake Street. Yeah, it's good. And next Tuesday at Highland Park, downtown Highland Park, Cleveland and Fort Parkway, we're gonna have the Peace Bus pulled up on the sidewalk with our big banner that says no war in Ukraine, and with the Wham and the Vets for Peace logos on it. And we will be out handing out literature and stickers and peace buttons and whatever, and talking to people and having a dialogue. So that'll be at 1 o'clock, I believe, on Tuesday. So if you're bored and you don't have enough things to get into.
Okay, so it says 12 noon to 2.
See, like I said,
Okay.
12 noon.
And there's a flyer here, so
And
don't.
it's on Wednesday.
Banner in it, 12
Oh, it's
noon
not
to
Wednesday.
2.
Well,
Wednesday.
damn.
Can I say just something final words?
Yeah, so final words.
Which is that, you know, I was quite rattled by what happened yesterday. I've been traveling around now for over 6 months. And while there have been protesters at places, and they come inside and they ask tough questions, and some of them get up and grab the mic, which is absolutely fine for me, I think it's great, there was never violence like there was yesterday.
Well, could you describe briefly what happened?
Yeah, some of us don't know what you're talking about.
Well, there were very, very angry protesters who were saying things like "Medea lies, Ukrainians die," spitting at me, pushing, and I was taping one of them who used the F word every other word to talk about me, and then he grabbed my phone, took it, put it in his pocket, and then somebody tried to help to get the phone back, and it turned into a fist fight on the ground where this guy was really pummeling, and then David had to hold on to the door for dear life to keep them from coming inside, and they were saying, "You love occupation in Russia, you love occupation in Russia, we're going to occupy this place. I mean, you love occupation in Ukraine by the Russians, we're going to occupy this place." And so it was pretty ugly.
Yeah, and Craig Wood, one of our veterans for peace guys, he was the one that somebody put a placard right in his face, and he pushed it away, and Craig has got anger issues, and he doesn't like doing that. He's kind of got a hockey mentality, so he kind of got into it. Whatever, he ended up on the ground. He ended up at the VA, getting his
In the
shoulder put back
emergency
into
room,
place.
yeah, he got his shoulder dislocated.
Yeah, and so he had to spend the evening at the VA. So they're.
Ed Lucia was, somebody's put an elbow into her, she was knocked over back.
I kind of grabbed him by the arm.
So yeah, it was violent. So I just say that, but I said that by way of saying that I have since put that in the back of my mind, and I feel very inspired and impressed by the activist community here, because just in the little time I'm here, I saw the people at the Palestinian Nakba protest today, which was a wonderful community. You have so many actions coming up. You have 2 people in this small community, Todd and Colleen, who have signed the New York Times ad. There's only like 12 in the entire country. You have Ilhan Omar. You have Betty McCollum, who is the only one who will put forward a bill to protect Palestinian children. And that comes from activism in this community. You have an incredibly organized WHAM, Women Against Military Madness, that rivals any national group. It's a local group. It does more work than a lot of national groups do. And you have, I would say, because I've been around and been with them, one of the most, if not the most, Veterans for Peace activist group here. So thank you all. You really are an inspiration. And I'm waiting to see very soon, with the activism you're going to do on this, that your representatives are going to come out, whether it's a letter, a bill, a resolution, or even a little tweet saying that they want negotiations because they are hearing from their base. Thank you.
Thank you.